When I pulled into the gravel lot of Magnolia Courtyard, I sat with the engine running for a minute too long. The low hum of the air conditioner couldn't drown out the inner static in my chest. I'd RSVP'd yes weeks ago. I even bought a new blouse, navy silk, appropriate, non-threatening, the kind of clothing that says, "I'm fine, I've moved on." As I stepped out, I glanced up at the old mansion-turned-restaurant. Spanish moss hung like sighs from the oaks, and the air was thick with the scent of magnolia and something roasted. Inside, I heard laughter, clinking glasses, someone clapping. They'd already started. The hostess smiled politely, scanning the list. "You must be Miss Vaughn," she said. "Just Sofonisba," I replied, my voice even, practiced. "They've already started?" She nodded, led me through the arched entrance into the main dining room. I spotted them instantly, my family, gathered around a long table that shimmered with polished silver and forced celebration. There was no space at the head. Instead, my chair waited at the very end, lighter in color, noticeably lower. Wobbly. No cushion. "Is this seat for me?" I asked, almost to myself. My cousin Emma, never one to waste a beat, called out, "Oh, you made it! We thought maybe you weren't coming. Long drive, huh?" Alethea, already mid-toast, glanced over her champagne. "Didn't realize you'd need a full seat, Soph." I smiled, the way you do when you're cornered but still holding a knife. I sat, adjusting the chair subtly to hide the wobble. It didn't work. "Glad you're here," my father offered, not looking up from his water glass. I wanted to say something, anything, but I just unfolded the napkin, placed it on my lap, and nodded. The table buzzed with inside jokes and curated stories. Someone toasted the 10 years of Vaughn legacy. Another praised Alethea for carrying the vision. No one mentioned me. No one asked how I was doing, what I'd been building. Emma leaned toward me, smiling wide. "You must be proud of your sister. I mean, wow, what a climb, right?" "She really brought it to life," added Uncle Carl, who once told me startups were just ways for broke people to pretend they had jobs. I nodded again. She certainly carried something. Across the room, Mahola moved like water, quiet, steady. Her uniform crisp, her steps calculated. She was always good at moving through spaces without being seen. But she saw everything. She poured water into my glass, her eyes meeting mine for just a beat too long. There was something in them, something heavy. She didn't smile. She didn't blink. "Thanks," I said. She gave a curt nod, stepped away. But as she did, I saw her hands tremble slightly. The napkin she placed beside my bread plate looked different. Folded oddly, firmer than the others, intentional. I didn't reach for it. The menu arrived, a thick leather-bound volume pretending to be modest. When the waiter reached my end, I closed it gently. "I'll have the presidential cut," I said. "Rare." Alethea paused mid-laugh. "Oh?" Emma snorted. "Someone's feeling presidential." My father cleared his throat. "Maybe something lighter, Soph. It's a long night." "I'll have the steak," I repeated, tone calm, hands steady. "Thank you." The waiter nodded, scribbled, moved on. It wasn't about the steak. Mahola returned, this time with the wine list. I waved it off. She didn't leave immediately. Again, that look. This time, her lips parted like she wanted to speak, but didn't. She placed the silverware down, deliberately aligning the knife parallel to the edge of the plate. Her hand brushed the napkin again, just slightly. Then she was gone. My pulse climbed. Something about the way the cloth sat felt like a dare. From across the table, Alethea laughed at something trivial. Her voice carried. She always made sure it did. I didn't unwrap the napkin, not yet. I took in the room. The gold-trimmed chandeliers, the glint of Alethea's ring as she gestured, the forced laughter around her like backup singers. Every detail choreographed to make her look inevitable. I turned back to my plate. They called Alethea up again, not formally but casually enough to make it look natural. One of the board members handed her a box with the family crest, polished walnut. Everyone clapped. "She deserves it," my mother murmured to no one in particular. My fingers tightened around the water glass. I could feel the condensation slip under my nails. When Alethea opened the box, a pair of engraved cufflinks sparkled under the light. She smiled, held them up. "They're inscribed with her initials," someone said proudly. No one asked who had first pitched the company idea, or who stayed up for nights building the framework that Alethea would later present with glossy poise. They didn't need to ask. They knew. I caught Mahola's gaze again as she walked by with a tray. Her mouth formed words, but her voice didn't come. "Don't eat." I blinked. Did I imagine it? She was already gone. The room felt colder suddenly. Or maybe it was just me, separating from the illusion. Every clink of a glass, every slice of a knife against porcelain, echoed louder now. The steak hadn't arrived, but dread settled on the table before it did. I stared at the napkin, still untouched. The fold was too deliberate, too purposeful. My mind turned over every possible explanation. A mistake? A habit? A code? Why would she warn me? Did she recognize me? Was it about the food? Or was it something worse? My breathing slowed. From the far end of the room, a bell chimed. Mahola reappeared, this time carrying a covered silver platter. I sat upright. She walked toward me slowly, methodically. As she placed the dome-covered plate in front of me, her hand barely grazed the napkin. Our eyes met again. Then she said, almost too softly to hear, "Enjoy your meal." And in that moment, I realized the message wasn't about the steak at all. It was about everyone else at this table. The cloche landed in front of me with a theatrical clink, polished silver glinting beneath the chandelier. Mahola's hand hovered a second longer than it should have as she set the utensils beside the plate. She leaned in, voice low and almost lost in the din of laughter around us. "Enjoy," she said. But there was no warmth in it. Alethea raised her glass across the table, eyebrows lifted just slightly. "Well, well, presidential cut. Someone's making a statement." Chuckles circled the table. Emma smirked. My father sipped his wine like nothing had happened. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My breath had caught mid-chest. I looked down. Something was wrong. The napkin next to my plate didn't match the others. Thicker, firmer, folded into a triangle instead of the clean square everyone else had. It was barely noticeable, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. My fingers trembled slightly as I lifted the edge. I felt the weight tucked inside before I saw it. A slip of paper folded tight and clean, like someone had done it in a hurry but with purpose. I unfolded it under the table. "Don't eat. This place isn't safe. Watch them, not me." I stopped breathing altogether. I glanced up. Mahola was gone, already weaving between tables. She didn't look back. "Dad," Alethea chirped, "you should tell that story from the Charleston Gala. Everyone loves that one." He launched into a tale about his old investors and some last-minute miracle pitch Alethea had saved. All false. I was there. I wrote that deck. But that wasn't what had my heart hammering now. The note was still open in my lap. Not safe? What did that even mean? The food? The people? The entire performance? Was it literal? I looked around. No one else seemed to notice anything. My plate was still covered. No smell of steak yet. Just wine, flowers, a faint trace of lemon from someone's salad. I glanced toward the server's path, but didn't see Mahola. My hands folded the note quickly and slid it into my clutch. If I let it sit in the open any longer, I might scream. I tried to smile, to lean back, to fake normalcy. But my mind spiraled fast. How many times had I brushed off this gut feeling? The unease, the sideways glances, the way Alethea positioned herself at every center and pushed me subtly further from the frame. My plate was still untouched, but suddenly it felt like it was staring at me. The entire room had turned into a stage, and I was the one sitting on a prop chair at the wrong end of the table, holding a message I wasn't supposed to get. I watched closely now. Levi had his phone under the table, thumb scrolling every few seconds. Alethea whispered something to him, smiling tightly. My mother hadn't looked at me once since the cloche landed. Her gaze was locked somewhere over my left shoulder, and my father kept adjusting his cufflinks over and over again. The same ones I gave him 5 years ago. The ones I didn't see on him until Alethea brought them back into rotation, Everyone looked rehearsed. Even their silences had timing. They laughed in sync, nodded in rhythm. They passed the bread basket like a well-oiled machine. It was theater, carefully staged and performed. I placed my hand gently on the cloche, about to lift it, then stopped. Instead, I pushed the plate away, slowly, like it was nothing more than a choice of appetite. "I'm feeling a little off," I said, forcing lightness into my tone. "Might skip the steak tonight." Emma leaned over. "Shame. That's a $75 piece of beef." Alethea smirked. "Rare isn't for everyone." The laugh that followed felt like applause for a punchline I hadn't written. Mahola walked past again. Brief eye contact. She gave the faintest nod. Barely there, but I saw it. This wasn't a joke. I stared at the glass of water in front of me, my fingers wrapped around the base, just to ground myself. "I'm not hungry," I said again, quieter this time. No one challenged it. The conversation picked up without me, as though I hadn't spoken at all. The wine flowed. Alethea laughed. Someone brought up the time she presented in New York. They clapped. I was there. I built that pitch, too. I memorized the room, the faces, the clinks of silverware, the gleam of the centerpiece candles. Then I folded the napkin again, slid it fully into my clutch this time. If you sit at a table where respect isn't served, leave. But I wasn't leaving. Not yet. Let them talk. Let them pretend. I was listening now, watching. Every smile, every toast, every story they told about our journey. Let them think I was still playing the role. I'd played it well enough to get the invitation. But the real performance had just begun. Midway through the dinner, the lights dimmed slightly and a large projector screen descended from the ceiling. The hum of conversation quieted. Alethea clapped her hands twice and announced, "A little surprise for everyone. A walk down memory lane." The screen flickered to life. Instrumental piano played softly as a montage began. Magazine covers, ribbon cuttings, panels where Alethea shook hands with men in suits. The logo of our family's business shimmered between frames. I felt my chest tighten. I remembered every frame they showed. I remembered being there, and yet I wasn't. In photo after photo, my sister was front and center, always polished, always radiant. But I, who helped design the launch slides, who stayed up proofreading proposals, wasn't even in the background. Not once. I clenched my napkin under the table. Then came a tight shot of our first office. I recognized the whiteboard and layout. I'd arranged that entire setup. But the frame only captured Alethea, arms crossed, looking visionary. History isn't written by the victors, I thought. It's edited by them. The screen faded to black, and the room erupted into polite applause. I didn't move. Emma tapped her glass and stood up with a champagne flute raised. "Let's give a round of applause to the woman who made this all happen. Alethea, you are nothing short of extraordinary." Scattered cheers followed. My mother dabbed her eyes delicately, as if touched by a sermon. Emma continued. "And let's not forget her little sister. Eloise, I think?" Laughter erupted. Someone whispered, "It's Sofonisba," but no one corrected the record aloud. I smiled, just enough to match the room's mood. Inside, something caved. Being forgotten is one kind of insult. Being remembered wrong is a whole other violence. As the moment passed, my thoughts slipped backward. 5 years ago. Our tiny shared apartment in Atlanta. I'd drafted our first business plan in pencil on the back of grocery store receipts. Alethea paced the living room, reciting pitches to the plants. She stumbled over key terms, so I coached her, rewrote parts of the pitch. I cleaned up her presentation, prepared her clothing, even straightened her posture. On launch night, I stood in the wings while she walked onto the stage alone. "Thanks to all who've supported this vision," she had said. No names, no nod. I remembered standing near the catering table afterward, ignored even by our aunts, who swarmed around Alethea like bees to a sugar bowl. Back in the present, I blinked as the server set down a crystal plaque in front of Alethea. It was engraved in gold cursive. Founder, visionary, leader. The applause surged again. I scanned the table. No one else looked uncomfortable. My mother clapped softly. My father gave an approving nod. Emma raised her glass again. I felt a wave of nausea, but not from food. They knew. They had always known. They chose silence. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone, swiping open a blank notes app under the tablecloth. My fingers hovered, then typed. They won't write me in. I'll write myself out loud. Alethea raised the plaque again, smiling graciously. Our eyes met. Her expression faltered for a second. Just long enough. I looked away. This wasn't about correcting the record anymore. It was about creating one of my own. My late mentor, Irene, used to say, "You don't lose your story unless you hand over the pen." I had handed over too many pens. Not anymore. This time, I would hold the mic and the receipt. As dessert trays passed by, I remained seated, sipping water, observing the celebration like an anthropologist studying a pack of predators dressed in pearls. Alethea glided from one conversation to another like a trained pianist switching keys. Such humility, someone whispered. She deserves every bit of this, said another. I stared at the plaque again. What they called humility was just years of rehearsed domination disguised as grace. What they called legacy was theft wrapped in a monogrammed box. And what they called family was a curated, exclusive membership that I apparently hadn't paid enough to maintain. She walked past me, pausing only slightly. You okay? She asked, fake concern plastered on. Never better, I replied, tone flat. You? She tilted her head. It's a big night, a lot of people watching. I nodded slowly. Exactly why I came. She lingered for a beat, then smiled, teeth perfectly white, and moved on. Back in my phone, I added, They think I'm still the understudy. My hand touched the clutch where the napkin was still folded. The message from Mahola lingered in my mind. That wasn't just about the food. It was about what had been simmering under the surface for years. If they had expected a scene, they didn't know me at all. You don't take down a stage by screaming, Irene had said once. You take it apart, one spotlight at a time. And that's what I planned to do. As the night wound down, speeches came and went, toasts, more laughter. Alethea circled again, this time leaning toward me as if to offer sisterly affection. Big things coming next quarter, she said. I think you'll be proud. I'm already writing about it, I replied. She blinked. Writing? Documentation, I clarified. Just making sure I get the history right. Her smile didn't return. It wasn't anger in her eyes. It was awareness that I hadn't come just to eat, that I'd come to watch, to listen, and to remember, because what they forgot to mention would soon be the only part anyone would remember. It took only 3 rings for the hostess to transfer me to the manager. I stepped outside, into the narrow corridor near the restrooms, pretending I was confirming parking validations. My voice was calm, even pleasant. Hi, I was just wondering, who reserved and paid for tonight's dinner event for the Vaughn party? The line went quiet for a second too long. Then came the answer, clipped but clear. The reservation was made under Ms. Alethea Vaughn, paid in full last week. Not my father. Not the man they all pretended still led this family. Thanks, I said, and hung up. Inside, they were toasting to legacy. Outside, I realized I'd been seated at a stage play where every line was written by someone else. They built the table and invited me just to prove I no longer had a seat at it. I stepped out into the cool night air. Not too far, just enough to breathe. And while everyone was laughing over the same jokes I'd heard since I was 8, I opened my phone and typed in the URL I hadn't visited in over a year, the domain of our original business. The screen loaded for a split second, then redirected, automatically, to a new site. Alethea Consulting, new branding, sleek fonts, same colors I chose when we built our identity. But nowhere on the page did my name appear, not in the About section, not in the timeline, not even in the Founder's Vision tab. I opened the page source, Meta. Founded by Alethea M. Vaughn, over and over again. They didn't just forget me, they replaced me. They buried me under a pile of polished fonts and filtered pictures, then smiled as they dropped the dirt. My chest didn't tighten, it chilled. You can survive being forgotten, I murmured. Being rewritten is another kind of wound entirely. I slid my phone back into my clutch and walked slowly toward the table again, making sure to adjust my expression. Smile light. Shoulders loose. Mask back on. Alethea was already pouring wine, her laugh cutting through the air like confetti. "You have to try this Merlot," she told the couple next to her. "It's from the vineyard I visited during our expansion trip." Our interesting word choice. She looked up as I took my seat. "Everything okay?" "Just needed some air," I said. She nodded, handed me a glass she'd already poured. It was an old dance. My father made a joke about both daughters taking over the world. They laughed. I didn't. Because I knew what he meant. If he leveled both of us, he wouldn't have to answer for why he handed the house keys to the wrong daughter. A cousin leaned closer during dessert. "So, you're still doing that online teaching thing, huh?" His tone slid the question into the air like it was a compliment wrapped in pity. I gave him a thin smile. "Yeah, that little teaching thing paid for your daughter's summer STEM camp, actually." He coughed. "Oh, right. Yeah. Thank you again. I'd forgotten." No one forgets when they're helped. They just don't like remembering who helped them, especially if that person made them feel smaller in the process. I turned back to the table, watching Alethea. She moved like a woman playing queen. Not just seated at the center, she was the center. They hung on her words, her gestures. Even her pauses were timed for applause. I pulled out my phone under the table and typed a message to Mahola. "Can we talk later? Something is unraveling." Her reply came seconds later. "Soon, you'll know when." I slid the phone away, straightened my spine. I wasn't just here for the show anymore. I was here to study the actors. And maybe, just maybe, pull back the curtain when they least expected it. Alethea stood, raising her glass. "I just want to say how deeply honored I am by all of you." Chairs shifted. Everyone focused. She began, voice smooth as the Merlot in her hand. She thanked our father for decades of guidance, our mother for unwavering strength, and even an old professor who once told her she could lead a room. She didn't mention me, not once, not even as the sister who sat across from her for years, helping write scripts, build plans, draft pitches. Nothing. But she glanced at me. Briefly, as if daring me to flinch. I smiled instead, not because I felt joy, but because I knew it unnerved her more than silence. "When they don't name you," I whispered, "it's because they're afraid of what naming you would mean." I tilted my head slightly as she finished her toast. People clapped, some whistled. She gave a small bow, humble enough to pass, but proud enough to sting. She sat. Yeah, and I stayed still, hands folded, watching her. Inventory. Every word, every gesture, every omission. Because silence was no longer my surrender. It was strategy. Alethea clapped twice, her rings catching the light just enough to pull every eye her way. "Before dessert," she said, standing tall, "we wanted to take a moment to show a little appreciation, a small thank you to those who made this journey possible." I could feel it coming, the staged generosity, the curated gratitude. Mahola and another server entered, holding trays lined with velvet boxes, each bearing our family crest. One by one, they were handed out, thick, embossed, weighty. Emma got a monogrammed pen set. My uncle, a custom cufflink case. Even Levi received a silver bookmark engraved with a Latin quote he probably wouldn't understand. The boxes shimmered under the chandelier like favors at a wedding no one wanted to admit was forced. Mine arrived last, a plain envelope, off-white, no logo. I turned it over. My name was misspelled in generic script, Saffronisa. No one else at the table blinked. I opened it. Inside was a photocopied thank you note, signed by Alethea's assistant. Not even an original signature, just inkjet and indifference. The paper shook in my hands, but I stayed still. Around me, they held up gifts, admired them, laughed at the little inscriptions. Emma leaned over. "What did you get?" I didn't respond, just slid the envelope back onto the table, half tucked under my plate. Sometimes the insult isn't in what's missing, it's in what they pretend to offer. I was folding the note when Stella appeared beneath the tablecloth like a ghost. "Hi," she whispered, crawling under the long white linen and popping her head next to my lap. "Hey there," I said, startled but composed. She looked around, then leaned closer. Mom says you used to make trouble here, but you're quiet now. I blinked. The words landed like a slap that had been waiting in the dark. From the mouths of children, I looked down at her. Do you think being quiet means being good? She thought about it. It means nobody looks at you weird. Her answer wasn't cruel. It was clean, honest, a reflection of the conversations that happened just out of my earshot, or so they thought. Back to your seat, love, Alethea called sweetly. Don't bother your aunt. Stella scrambled up and disappeared. I watched her run back to the woman who had taught her that silence was survival. I picked up my glass, took a long sip, then set it down with enough firmness to hush the clinking of nearby cutlery. I clinked it again. The room quieted slightly. I just wanted to thank everyone, I said, voice gentle, gaze steady, for my heartfelt envelope. A few heads turned. Emma's eyebrows lifted, confused. Alethea's smile froze, not gone, just tense, like a mask slipping at the corner. Well, Emma laughed, at least you didn't get cufflinks. I nodded, eyes on her. True. I don't need gifts to remind me what I've lost to get here. Several people looked away. Others gave forced smiles. Mahola, walking past, offered no words, just a hand on my shoulder, brief and grounding. The envelope sat beside my plate, looking smaller by the minute. I closed my eyes for a beat and remembered. Those early days, late nights. I was the one formatting pitch decks, reviewing contracts. While Alethea practiced her pauses in front of the mirror, I was in the background adjusting the spotlight. She's the voice. I'm the blueprint. We were a team. Until the audience arrived, even the logo, our original mark, was something I sketched on a napkin at a diner. Now it was on every invitation, every slide, every branded water bottle, and no one knew who drew it. The gift box ceremony. Just the last stroke of erasure, wrapped in gloss and gold foil. More voices buzzed at the table, but the current had shifted. I noticed the murmurs. Some relatives leaned toward each other, whispering. A few avoided my eyes altogether. Cousin Jared offered a weak smile. Nice speech. I wasn't trying to make one, I replied. Alethea's laugh came louder now, more performative than ever. She raised her wine. Let's toast to resilience. It's in our blood. I didn't raise my glass. I lowered my eyes to the envelope again, turned it over, found nothing on the back. No second page, no hidden note, just absence. I pulled out my phone under the table, opened my notes app, typed one sentence. They erased me with paperwork. I'll respond in record. And another, from memory. You don't burn bridges if you build your own damn road. I saved it, slid the phone away. I didn't get up. I didn't make a scene, but I sat taller. I was no longer attending this dinner. I was witnessing it. My presence wasn't passive. It was a stance. Alethea scanned the room again, catching the subtle shift. She knew. She felt it. The balance had tilted, if only by inches, and just when I thought the night had exhausted its cruelty, someone slid into the seat next to me who wasn't supposed to be there. I need some air, I said quietly, pushing back from the table. No one looked up, not even my father. I slipped away between the second and third toast, walking with calm precision toward the rear hallway. The scent of roasted garlic and seared butter trailed behind me as I passed the wine station and turned the corner toward the staff wing. A busboy saw me coming and, without a word, nudged open a door that wasn't meant for guests. I nodded, stepped through. The floorboards creaked with memory. I passed the kitchen entrance, the stainless steel gleaming under bright overhead lights, and kept moving until I reached the narrow hallway behind the service corridor. She was waiting there, in a shadow between two crates of stemware. Mahola, not in uniform anymore. She had swapped the apron for a simple cardigan. Her hands were folded in front of her, her face calm, unreadable. But her eyes, they carried weight. I wasn't sure you'd come, she said, her voice quiet. I wasn't sure either, I replied. I watched them erase you in real time, she continued. I didn't know if you saw it too. I nodded slowly. I saw it, I just didn't want to believe it. She handed me a thin manila folder. It was light, but I could feel the pressure in its weight. Inside were printed emails, company memos, calendar logs. One page stood out. User S. Vaughn. Access revoked. Effective immediately. Dated exactly 7 days before this dinner. Signed off by Alethea. There was also a Slack message printed out, a joke someone made about ghosting Soph before she ghosts the brand. I closed the folder slowly. They didn't just cut me out, I said. They celebrated it. Mahola folded her arms. They thought you wouldn't fight, that if they moved quietly enough, you'd stay quiet too. They forgot who taught you to archive everything, I said, meeting her gaze. She gave a small smile. And who I learned to follow. She pulled out a sticky note from her pocket, a string of numbers. My old server access. I never deleted it, just in case. I took it, tucking it into my clutch without a word. What are you going to do with it? She asked. I didn't answer right away. I leaned against the cool wall, taking in the hum of dishwashers and distant silverware. Nothing, I said. Not yet. Her eyebrow lifted. Let them finish their show, I said. Then I'll write the ending. She reached for my hand, squeezed it briefly, and then vanished down the back hallway without another word. When I returned to the table, my seat still sat empty, plate untouched. I took my place again, slid my clutch under my thigh, sat straighter. No one noticed I had gone, except Alethea. Her eyes flicked up for the briefest second when she saw me. We didn't speak, but the way her knuckles whitened around her champagne glass said enough. You erased me, I thought. But you didn't delete me. That was your mistake. The speeches resumed, laughter returned, toasts came and went like weather, but I wasn't watching the sky anymore. I was charting it. They always underestimated the quiet ones, until the quiet ones built libraries out of their silence. I pulled out my phone, opened a private cloud app, and started uploading the files Mahola gave me to a folder titled Truth Timestamp. Then, another tab. Email. To samuel.gibbs@ledgerpost.com. Subject. Background on Vaughn Legacy. Internal docs. I didn't hit send, just saved it as a draft. Not yet. Revenge is noisy, I typed in my notes. What I want is recognition. Back at the head of the table, Alethea stood again, tapping her glass for attention. Another speech. Another show. I watched her. Same cadence, same gestures, like a singer singing a song she didn't write. My hand rested gently on the folder beneath the table. This time, the script wasn't hers. The lights dimmed just enough to signal something curated. The murmur at the table quieted, and someone clinked a fork against a glass. A large projection screen rolled down from the ceiling, slow and dramatic like everything else Alethea orchestrated. Soft jazz started to play, one of those royalty-free piano tracks meant to evoke nostalgia without specifics. The screen lit up with a slideshow, Alethea at the ribbon cutting, Alethea with a senator, Alethea at a charity event holding a check larger than her torso. One by one, each frame drew polite nods, murmured admiration. I waited for my face, waited to see myself in the photo from our first co-working space, the one I furnished on a credit card and repainted over a weekend. Nothing. Group shots where I remembered standing on the end, cropped. Holiday pictures where I'd hosted and cooked, missing entirely. Then it came, the photo I took, the one from our second investor event, captured with my own camera. And beneath it, the caption read, Creative Direction, Alethea Vaughn. I didn't breathe. It wasn't that they forgot me. It was that they wanted it to look like I was never there. Halfway through the reel, the screen flashed a Thanksgiving shot from 2019, a table full of relatives, silverware mid-clink, wine poured with smiles. I was in that one, blurry, mid-blink, face half obscured. Oh, look, Alethea called out from the head of the table. That's the one where Sophonisba looks surprised. Laughter rolled softly, casual but targeted. I took a sip of my wine. The glass rattled slightly against the plate as I set it down. They use jokes like scalpels here, I thought. No blood, but they cut deep. The slideshow ended with a title card, celebrating 10 years of Vaughn legacy. No co-founders, no original team, no version of the truth. Applause broke out. Some clapped enthusiastically, others slower. A few didn't clap at all. But no one said a word. I scanned the room. Some eyes found their plates. A couple of cousins looked genuinely unsure whether to celebrate or cringe. The silence between claps was heavier than the music itself. You ever seen a room clap for a lie? I thought. It's louder than truth ever gets. Dessert arrived. Small cheesecakes with caramel swirls. I pushed mine around the plate. Jacob, my cousin who had stayed mostly neutral until now, leaned in. Didn't you used to run the pitch meetings? I looked at him without blinking. I ran everything, until I stopped getting copied on the calendar. He frowned. She said you stepped back. She says a lot of things, I replied. Doesn't make them true. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked down at his fork like it held the answer. A quiet awkwardness settled between us. Across the table, Emma whispered something to Aunt Marie. They glanced over at me and quickly looked away. Behind napkins, I caught snippets. She's being difficult again. I thought she was over that phase. She should have just said thank you. I picked up my glass again, not to drink, but to give my hands something to do. You don't confront an empire with a scream, I thought. You take its bricks down, one by one. I caught Mahola's eyes across the room. She wasn't holding a tray anymore, just standing by the hallway, watching, waiting. I reached under the table and opened my phone. The draft email to the journalist stared back at me, subject line still blank. My thumb hovered over send. Not yet. Let them finish their speech. Instead, I opened messages and typed, "Slides done, it's my turn to speak next." I didn't hit send, just locked the screen and looked up. Alethea stood again, poised, prepared, the queen of curated legacy. I watched her adjust her bracelet, smooth her dress, step toward the mic. My hand grazed the folder in my lap, my version of the script, untouched, unrevised, unedited. They could have kept the spotlight, they could have kept the applause, but they couldn't stop the rewrite that was already underway. Alethea stood at the head of the table, raising her glass with that signature smile she reserved for rooms she knew she already owned. Her champagne flute caught the chandelier light just so, like it had rehearsed the reflection. She tapped it lightly. "Just a few words to close out this beautiful night," she began. The entire room shifted. Chairs leaned in. Phones were tucked away. All eyes fixed on her. But mine were on the folder resting on my lap. My fingers pressed gently against its edge, the paper inside warm from my skin. You only get one chance to steal back a narrative. This was mine. I stood. No toast. No announcement. Just the sound of my chair scraping back and silverware clinking as a few hands froze mid-air. Alethea's smile faltered for a split second. She blinked, then recovered. "Sophonisba, do you want to?" "I wasn't going to speak tonight," I said, voice even, loud enough for the entire table to hear. But something changed. You could feel it in the air, the way people sit up when a tremor runs under the floor but no one says earthquake yet. I looked around slowly. No panic. No show. Just presence. "I want to thank you all for being here," I continued. "For witnessing what's been presented as a legacy. As a celebration of 10 years of success, of unity, of family." Alethea's grip on her glass tightened. I nodded toward Mahola, who stood just near the doorway. She met my gaze, gave a nearly imperceptible nod, and stepped forward. I reached into my bag, pulled out a small Bluetooth speaker, and placed it gently in the center of the table. Then I hit play. The voice was unmistakable, clear, recorded from a meeting I wasn't supposed to know about. "If we keep her off the board long enough, no one will question who built this." Gasps. Forks dropped. One of my uncles sat back with a sharp breath. Alethea stared at the speaker like it had just grown teeth. Someone whispered, "Is that?" "That was taken out of context," Alethea said quickly, her voice shaking beneath the calm she was trying to wear. "No," I said, locking eyes with her. "It was taken from exactly the place you left me." In silence. The room stilled. I pulled out a printed form next, A transfer of ownership agreement dated 18 months ago. This document, I said, holding it steady, was signed under the claim of shared intention. I believed I was helping secure the company's future. What I didn't know was what you did with it after. Mahola stepped forward and handed another sheet to Jacob, who happened to be sitting next to my father. It was an email. Attached metadata showed that the original version of the agreement had been altered, deleted fields, adjusted timestamps. My name shifted from co-founder to consultant. I didn't step back, I said, steady. I was pushed, quietly, methodically, and with a smile. More whispers. Someone across the table muttered, "She's been lying for years?" Alethea's face twisted, not in anger, but in the disbelief of someone who had never expected to be challenged on her own stage. "You're ruining everything," she hissed, not loudly, but enough. "All because you couldn't handle being second best." I shook my head, slowly. You can't be second best at something you built first. My father moved as if to speak, but I raised a hand gently, eyes never leaving my sister. "Let her talk," I said. "She's good at rewriting things." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Aunt Marie stood, said she needed air, and walked out without saying another word. Emma just stared, wide-eyed, unsure of which side of the family line she was supposed to stand on. I took one last breath, exhaled slowly. "This wasn't revenge," I said. "This was restoration." I stepped back from the table and placed the folder next to the speaker, its edges aligned with the placemat. Then I looked down the table, at the chairs still full of people unsure if they were witnessing history or betrayal. Probably both. The room was frozen in place. Forks lay still. Napkins sat untouched. Even the wine stopped flowing. I returned to my seat like nothing had happened, but inside me, every nerve buzzed. The air was heavy, not with noise, but with the absence of it. No applause, no rebuttals, just silence. Alethea remained standing for a moment longer, still holding her glass mid-air. When she finally sat, her eyes flicked across the table, searching for someone, anyone, to restore control. But no one met her gaze. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the weight of release. I hadn't set fire to the room. I'd only opened the curtains and let daylight in. A soft cough, a clink of silver, then quiet again. I looked toward my mother, seated diagonally across from me. Her posture was straight, but her hands were clenched on her lap beneath the linen. I waited, for denial, deflection, a glazed look that said, "Let's not talk about it." But none came. Instead, she held my gaze. Her voice, when it came, was nearly a whisper. "I always knew it was wrong." I blinked, not at her words, but that she had waited this long to say them. "Then why didn't you stop it?" I asked, my voice level. She exhaled through her nose. "Because it was easier to pretend you didn't need us. You always walked so tall, like you didn't want anyone's help." "I didn't want help," I said. "I wanted the truth." She looked away then, staring into her untouched wine glass. A silence fell between us, one that felt less like a wall and more like a buried wire, humming with decades of misread glances and unspoken regrets. Across the table, Jacob leaned in, subtle, cautious. He slid a folded paper napkin toward me. Inside, printed small but clear, was an email chain. From Alethea Vaughn. To Edgar Vaughn. Subject, messaging alignment. Sophonisba doesn't fit the image we want to project. The timestamp was from the week I was removed from the company's website. The week I stopped receiving calendar invites. Below it, my father's reply. "Then make it clean. She's not confrontational. She'll walk away." I read it 3 times. My fingers trembled, but not from shock, from confirmation. It was all there, on paper. A plan not just to omit me, but to erase me as neatly as a line drawn in pencil. I tucked the note back into my clutch. No tears, no outburst. Just a quiet understanding. I hadn't imagined it. And now, they couldn't deny it. I rose and stepped outside. The Georgia air was warm, heavy with moisture, and thick with the scent of magnolia. I leaned against the stone ledge by the side patio. Mahola followed, but stayed a step behind. Silent. Steady. They thought I'd walk away, I said, eyes fixed on the garden lights. You almost did, she replied. I turned to her, and for once didn't correct her. But you didn't, she added, voice firmer. You stayed long enough to tell the truth. No, I said. I stayed long enough to hear what they thought I'd never find out. We stood there for another minute, letting the air speak where words would have failed. Back inside, the family had begun to splinter. Some sat stone-faced, others whispered in tense clusters. 2 chairs sat empty. Aunt Marie and Emma had left without saying goodbye. Alethea remained silent, arms crossed, shoulders tight, her smile now fully gone. My father stood, walked past me without a word, and disappeared down the hall toward the restroom. He never looked back. I didn't follow him. I didn't need an apology. I had proof. And strangely, that felt fuller than any closure he could have offered. I took my seat once more, the table half empty now. I picked up my wine glass, not to drink, but to mark the end of the performance. Truth is heavier than I expected. Even when you win, it doesn't feel like winning. I remembered something my therapist once told me after my first session. Validation often feels like grief when it comes too late. She was right. This wasn't revenge. It was reclamation, and still, it ached. I glanced around the table, at the few relatives who couldn't meet my eyes, and the ones who finally did. This wasn't about being invited back into their light. It was about refusing to let them pretend I'd never stood in it. I wasn't asking for their spotlight, I murmured to myself. I just wanted them to stop pretending I was never here. And somewhere between the silence and the shattered silverware, I realized I was free. The next morning, I returned to the same room, but it wasn't the same anymore. The dining hall was stripped of its grandeur. No laughter, no staged applause, no Alethea reciting rehearsed gratitude. Just the sounds of plates being stacked and chairs dragged across the scuffed wood floor by tired hands in aprons. The floral centerpieces were limp, petals drooping like weary sighs. Someone had left behind a single cufflink near the head seat, probably Levi. He always fidgeted when tension rose. I stepped toward the table. My coat still hung neatly on the back of the same chair I had sat in the night before. I ran my fingers along the surface of the table. There had been speeches, lies, silence that said more than any toast ever could. I could still feel the imprint of the folder in my lap, the cool weight of truth delivered without a scream. The only thing louder than truth is what it leaves behind. This table had once represented legacy. Now it felt like a crime scene. I took out my phone, snapped a photo of the disarray, and sent it to Mahola. Caption: No survivors. I left without taking the coat. In the hallway on the way out, I stopped short. There, mounted near the entrance, was a framed painting, title etched in bronze, "For Father." Below, a small engraved plate read, "Artist, Alethea Vaughn." But it wasn't her work. It was mine. I painted it on the kitchen floor of my old apartment after our father's bypass surgery. 2 weeks straight, after working 10-hour shifts and doing investor calls at night. It was the first time I let my hands do something that wasn't strategic or profitable. Just honest. I stepped closer, breath caught. And there, beneath the plaque, if you looked closely enough, you could still see the faded etching of my initials. SV. They didn't just steal stories. They tried to steal sentiment. Later that afternoon, I met Mahola at a quiet diner on East Bay Street. No frills, no white tablecloths. Just strong coffee and honest booths. She slid a weathered box across the table. "Found this last month in storage," she said. "Didn't know if it'd mean anything." I unwrapped it slowly. Inside were old pitch decks, rough drafts of our original business plans, handwritten logo sketches, a USB drive, time-stamped folders, screenshots, versions, A through G of our original website, all of it untouched, intact. "I couldn't protect your seat," she said, voice low. "But I saved your signature." I didn't say anything, just reached across and squeezed her hand. That night, I sat at home with the box open in front of me. It wasn't just paper. It was proof. A museum of everything I had once built and been told I didn't. A week later, I woke up to an email ping. Subject line: Founder erased. The woman behind Vaughn's original framework speaks out. It was a full-length piece in a regional business publication. I hadn't submitted anything, but someone had. They quoted sections from the documents Mahola saved, referenced the internal memos, cited the email Alethea had sent about removing me cleanly. They even included a side-by-side comparison of the painting's original metadata with the gallery's current display. I scrolled, stunned. Calls started coming in that afternoon. One from a board member asking why no one had heard my name in years. One from a silent investor wondering if his capital had been misrepresented. Alethea's PR firm went dark. My father issued a vague public statement. Leadership evolves over time. What matters is the lasting impact. He didn't mention me. They tried to brand you out of memory, Mahola texted. Turns out the truth is better at going viral. Later that week, I walked through Forsyth Park with my sketchbook. It had been years since I opened it, but my hand knew what to do. Halfway through a quiet charcoal study of a tree trunk, I received another message. From a venture fund representative. We saw your work. Would love to discuss your next chapter. I typed, I'm no longer building to be seen. I'm building so I never disappear again. Then deleted the message and closed the app. I'd answer later. This time, I'd start slow. I'd start quiet. On my terms. The next morning, a letter came in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single folded page in my mother's handwriting. You were never second. I just wasn't brave enough to say so. No apology, no explanation, just that. I placed it in the box Mahola had given me, with the drafts, with the proof, with the painting sketch I never signed. That box no longer held memories. It held narrative. Closure isn't the door slamming shut. It's realizing you can walk past it without needing to knock. And somewhere in that quiet victory, I began to sketch a new version of myself, with no one else's edits allowed. Morning lights seeped through the cracks of my curtains. There was no storm now, no noise, just the ordinary silence of a Monday that didn't need my permission to be peaceful. I lay in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling. Checked my phone. Nothing from Alethea. No email. No voicemail. Not even a text with a half-hearted, PR-drenched excuse. And surprisingly, I didn't feel disappointed. I used to rehearse forgiveness in my head. Whole conversations where she'd say she was sorry, and I'd listen, nod, maybe even cry. But now, silence suited me better. It was cleaner, more honest. Sometimes peace doesn't come when they apologize. It comes when you stop expecting them to. I opened my inbox, hovered over the draft I had saved months ago. A long, raw letter filled with everything I never said. Then I deleted it. No edits, no rereads, just gone. I made coffee slowly, each movement deliberate. Ground beans, boiled water, poured it steady into the French press. The act of being present in my own kitchen felt sacred now. I sat at the table with my mug and stared at the post-it I'd stuck to the edge of my mirror days ago. Build without permission. It felt like a challenge, a truth, a plan. I found myself thinking back to that night. The dinner, the folder, the voice memo. What I didn't say, what I chose instead. I could have shouted, could have called names, but no moment landed harder than my restraint. They had no script for silence, and that's what made them squirm. They heard me the loudest, I whispered to myself, when I didn't give them lines to perform against. I packed away old things, business cards with the family crest, notebooks marked with Vaughn logos, pens engraved with initials that no longer meant anything to me. That version of me was built for their approval. This one wasn't. Later that afternoon, I walked into a co-working space I hadn't visited in months. The walls were still the same muted gray. Same smell of printer ink and ambition, but I was different. I picked a quiet corner, opened my laptop, and created a folder titled, Not About Them, then a blank document. I stared at it for a long while, hands still, then typed, Chapter 1, and smiled. I wasn't trying to be seen anymore. I was just making sure I never disappeared again. On the way home, I stopped by my mother's house. She opened the door, surprised, robe still on. I came to return something, I said. She didn't ask what, just stepped aside. I handed her a box of old family photos, pictures I didn't want or need anymore, childhood snapshots, awkward school plays, the Christmas card I was cropped out of last year. She looked down at the box, said nothing. I came to return what doesn't belong to me anymore, I added. We stood in silence, not hostile, just done. No hugs, no questions. Just a mutual acknowledgement that we were both tired of pretending something still lived here. Take care of yourself, she finally said. You too, I replied, stepping back. It wasn't cold, it wasn't warm, it was just necessary. Forgiveness isn't for them, it's what makes me lighter when I walk away. That evening, I drove to the coast. The sun was already dipping low, casting orange streaks over the pier. I walked until the wood planks felt familiar under my shoes. Sat with a thermos of black coffee, notebook in my lap. The breeze tugged at the corners of my sweater. I flipped to the last page of my old notebook, the one I'd carried for years. It was full of drafts, diagrams, dates that marked things I built for people who never wanted to give me credit. I ripped out the final page, crumpled it. Let the wind carry it over the railing and into the water. It's not about what they took, it's about what I still have the power to create. I stood, breathed deep, and walked back, not with urgency, not with purpose, but with peace. The version of me they couldn't silence was just getting started. I booked the same ballroom they used for that legacy dinner. Same drapes, same chandeliers, same polished floors that once echoed Alethea's curated narrative. Except this time, the stage belonged to me. There were no white-gloved servers or gilded centerpieces, just rows of chairs, a podium, and the quiet energy of people expecting to hear something they hadn't heard before. I arrived early, walked every corner of the space, not out of nerves, but out of respect for what was about to happen. This was my ground now. My voice would no longer be filtered through their lenses. Reporters showed up. So did a few familiar faces from years past. Former co-workers, startup mentors, even an old investor who had once asked if I was Alethea's assistant. Neither Alethea nor my father were invited, but I saw their names pop up in the RSVP system, declined. Not because they were uninterested, but because they feared the questions that would follow. At 6:01 p.m., I stepped to the microphone. And I didn't clear my throat. I didn't apologize for the silence that preceded this. I just began. Thank you for being here. Tonight's not about exposing anyone. It's about restoring something that should have never been erased. A hush settled. I clicked to the first slide. The company's original roadmap appeared, dated, watermarked, and undeniably mine. Email threads, timestamps, internal memos, designs that bore my handwriting in the margins. I let each slide sit longer than needed, let people read, process, see the truth in black and white. There's a difference between being left out, I said, and being removed intentionally. Halfway through, I displayed two clips, side by side. On the left, Alethea delivering our launch speech. On the right, my original draft, word for word, my voice in a recording, rehearsing it 2 nights before she took the stage alone. People gasped, not because it was dramatic, because it was undeniable. You can steal a name, I said, pausing, but not a legacy. Legacy leaves footprints. The silence afterward felt like justice. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a folded letter, worn, creased at the corners. My mentor wrote this for me years ago, told me not to open it unless I started to forget who I was. I unfolded it, read aloud. Don't ask to be remembered, build things that won't let them forget. I folded it again, gently, and placed it back into my pocket. An hour later, articles hit the web. Original founder reclaims her story. The hidden architect of the Vaughn Empire. Sophonisba Vaughn speaks, and the industry listens. Alethea's funders froze their involvement. My father released a statement. 2 sentences long. No apology, just ambiguity dressed as maturity. I laughed, not out loud, just quietly to myself. He still can't say the words. That's his legacy, I muttered, closing the tab. I didn't need to respond. I didn't need a follow-up interview. The truth spoke louder than I ever could. Later that night, Mahola met me on the rooftop of the co-working space I now used as my creative lab. She handed me a small black frame. Inside, a quote we once taped above our desks in the early days. "Dignity isn't loud, but it never bows." We sat in silence for a while. She finally said, "You didn't burn it all down." I shook my head. I didn't want ashes. I wanted architecture. The next morning, I stood before a room of young women, founders, builders, thinkers. This wasn't a keynote. It was a workshop. They stared up at me, eyes full of questions and maybe hope. "The worst thing they'll ever do to you," I said, "is make you think silence is survival." I didn't tell them to be angry. I told them to be precise. "Some of you will be called difficult," I continued. "Some will be erased." I paused. "Let them breathe with me. When that happens, write louder." They clapped. Not out of politeness, out of recognition. Afterward, one of them approached me, nervous, clutching a notebook. "I'm building something," she said, "but I'm scared they won't take me seriously." I smiled. "That's your edge. They won't see you coming until it's too late." She laughed. I walked to the back of the room, away from the stage, and watched the group break off into small circles, sharing ideas, encouraging each other. This wasn't revenge. This was rebirth. And when the credits roll on their story, my name won't be missing anymore. It'll be the headline,